people of Earth. We have come to upgrade your cosmic consciousness. DNA activation ready. In 3, 2, 1.
Hi, welcome to Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership. I'm Craig Anderson.
And I'm Lou Quinto.
Lou, today we are wrapping up the 4th chapter of our series on the Great Resignation.
And we've reached across international borders to do this. This is going to be our first international interviewer. I mean, I'm excited. We're expanding into Canada. Even though our podcast is downloaded worldwide, we haven't talked to anybody worldwide, but we're going just across the border to Ottawa, and we're going to be talking to Simon Kardynal.
Yes, Simon is the host of the Trench Leadership Podcast.
Which he invited you. He hasn't invited me yet to be a guest.
It's a classy podcast.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I'll have to talk to Mr. Kardynal after the interview.
Yeah, you might have to. So what he does on the Trench Leadership Podcast is he talks about emerging leaders. It's a topic we've touched on in the past, especially as we talk about the millennials and the next generation of leaders. But we really wanted to get the perspective of what are the next generation of leaders thinking about as they look at this idea of the Great Resignation. What's important to them? How are they getting their training? How are they trying to grow into their careers? So we have a great interview with Simon, and we're ready for it right now. Simon, welcome to Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership. We are so glad to have you here with us today.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me here on the show. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I think we're going to have some real serious talks. It'll be a lot of fun.
Now, Simon, Craig and I were talking. You are our first international guest. We have not crossed the boundaries of the U.S., so you have some big shoes that you have to, I won't say fill, you have to create big shoes as we go forward and we get more international speakers. You've got to set the tone to make sure that everything's right. So being from Canada, I know that A is going to pop up every now and then, right?
Oh, you're absolutely correct about that.
And if I remember from my work in Canada, the reason why Canadians say A is because Canada is spelled Canada, and it's just the A comes out.
It just rolls off the tongue. Yeah.
Right. Yes. And being with you, I wish I had listened more in French class in high school. Even after 2 years, the only thing I can remember is écoutez et répétez. Which for those of our listeners means listen and repeat. That's the only thing that got drilled into my head that I remember after 2 years of French. So
if it helps, that's quite the case for most Canadians as well. So that a lot of us are able to speak French or speak both languages, but there's quite a number that can't as well. So
yeah,
there it is.
That's fantastic. So,
well, I had the opportunity to be on, or will have soon the opportunity to be on Simon's podcast, where we talked about mentoring and had a great conversation about that. But what Simon, you really focus on the Trench Leadership Podcast is the idea of where we talk about emerging leaders, those leaders who are in the trenches. And you've had one season under your belt, I think is coming up to a close, your first season. And we wanted to drill into with you today, not drill into you, that would just be rude. Drill into with you today some topics around what you found with emerging leaders at Q&A and Breakthrough Leadership. We're really talking about all levels of leadership all the time, and Lou and I have spent a lot of time talking about the next generation of leaders and what's going to be important to them. So let's just go right for it right out of the gate. And something Lou and I have talked about, a lot of what we do here is Lou and I do have our own opinions that we promote when we just do he and I talking, and then we bring people on to validate us. So that's what we've got for you today. Yes. So Simon, the first question I wanted to kind of kick us off with is, in all your conversations and interactions in your past history, how well are organizations and companies preparing their next generation leaders? What are you seeing out there and hearing?
Well, probably the number one thing that I hear most often, and something that I've seen throughout my career, is that emerging leaders are brought into an emerging leadership position, not based off their skills as a leader, because quite often they haven't even gotten to that point where they've had an opportunity to showcase them in a formal manner. So what generally tends to happen is people are promoted based off their technical skill set and then thrust into a leadership role. Oh, you're really, really good at welding, so we're going to put you in charge of a team of welders. Well, that doesn't necessarily translate into a skill set to lead, because now your mentality, the way you're having to look at things might change a little bit. And if a person just wants to be a welder, for example, or they just want to be an accountant, and there's nothing wrong with any of those things, if all of a sudden you're thrust into these roles and you don't know how to deal with that or how to adjust to the new leadership position, that's very, very challenging. And that's one of the biggest things we've seen so far.
Interesting. Now, I'm going to ask a question here, and I mentioned that you're joining us from Ottawa. Do you see a difference between the U.S. and Canada when it comes to how emerging leaders are trained, developed? Is there a significant difference?
It's really hard to say. My experiences have been not necessarily limited. I have had, it turns out, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. It turns out that the majority of my guests are from the United States. So I've had a lot of talks and a lot of discussions with different leaders at different levels in the United States. And one of the commonalities that we've seen all the time is an understanding that there's not necessarily a really great program in place or a specific type of setup that is going to target emerging leaders to help them move forward in the beginning. Because quite often in the beginning, a leader having a hard time, whether they're from Canada, the US, really anywhere, it's a personal attack on themselves. Am I able to do this? There's an expectation. Now I'm in charge. Everyone thinks I need to know exactly what I'm doing. How can I do this? There's a lot of imposter syndrome. We see that has nothing to do with COVID. It transcends all boundaries. No one cares.
Right.
And so there are a lot of those challenges.
Yeah. And the reason why I ask is because, as I said in our green room discussion, I had an opportunity to do a lot of work in Canada with Bank of Montreal and with Craft Canada. And one of the things that I noticed, and Craig, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but when I went in to do training for a Canadian audience, those folks were always at the edge of their seat. They were taking notes, they were engaged, they participated. Versus here in the US, people come to class and they cross their arms and they just sit there and look at you like, okay, Mr. Teacher Man, what can you teach me? And I always noticed that there was more engagement and desire to move to the next level when I was in Canada. I mean, every concept I presented, and I do a lot of critical thinking along with the leadership, they wanted to know, and they would ask questions at the break, preventing me to use the restroom and make a break on time. But that's why I asked that question, because the other thing too is, and I'm making this very long, I'm sorry, in Canada, the tenure within a company tends to be a lot longer than it is here in the States. Is that something that I found when working, you would hear more often? I've been here 15 years. I've been here 18, 20 years. We're here in the States. It's like every 4 or 5 years, we go through, that 7-year itch, so to speak, with employees, and people shed their skin and move on to another company. So that's why with the emerging leaders, I asked the question about the difference between Canada and the US. So there was no question there. I just wanted to talk.
It's all clearly. One of the things I've heard a lot in actually I've run across a bit of research is that 76% by 2026, 76% of the entire workforce is going to be Gen Zers, however you want to say it, and
Zoomers. We call them Zoomers.
Oh, Zoomers. There we go. That's even better. And late millennials. And the interesting fact about that is, in those particular generations, their motivation is not so much get a paycheck, go home, and take care of your family. It's take care of the world, have a job that matters to themselves personally, while also being able to take care of their family. And so if a position or a job or a company is not providing that sense of satisfaction, then they'll just go somewhere else, because as it is right now, it's it's a buyer's market. If you want to go buy
Sure.
something, find a job, it's not difficult to do. So
Yeah, no, I think an article, Craig, you sent me said that 25 million people globally will have changed jobs since in the last 7 months. And the majority of them are that millennial group right now between the millennials between the ages of 30 and 45, which is really pushing up against the end of the millennial age bracket there. But, it's funny that you say that and you bring up millennials, is because it's not that we didn't know this. I mean, I do generational differences and do training in companies. And we've known for years that has been the perspective of the millennial, is that they just don't want the paycheck. They aren't in it for a career. They want to make a difference. They want to know where they're going within the organization. And it's almost like COVID slapped corporations across the face and brought what we knew to true reality now.
Absolutely. It's forced those things to the forefront. I know for myself, I'm 46 and I was in the Canadian military for 26 years. I joined them as a 19-year-old kid. And in January of 2021, I retired because I wasn't getting that sense. I wasn't having as much of that sense of satisfaction as I had leading up to that point. So I wanted to go try something else.
Right.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah. And one thing I think it's interesting, we talk about millennials and we talk about the Gen Z or Z or Zoom or whatever we're going with today, is this idea that they're looking for that alignment, both missionally, but also companies that are investing in them. And that can be a lot of the reason they move. But in that interim, as they're trying to figure that out, in your experiences talking to people, have you heard how people are kind of self-developing their leadership skills? How are they finding ways to grow as a leader?
So that's a really interesting question. And some of the answers that I've received throughout all the different interviews I've done is a lot of times people are going to podcasts. Podcasts are the new thing right now, where people can plug in and they can either sit down and dedicate some time to that, or they can go to the gym, walk their dog or whatever, and let that information soak in their mind. And the great thing is, while it's a small podcast universe right now, only hovering around 2 million podcasts worldwide, it's still a large growing thing. So there's lots of ways to find that information. And the challenge with that is I'm going to reword that a bit. The advantage to that is the information is easy to get to.
Mm-hmm.
The disadvantage of that is the information is easy to get to. And quite often when someone goes to Google, the very first thing they punch into the system, the first hit that comes up, that's the first thing, likely the only thing they're going to read. And it's also the truth, regardless if it's the truth or not. So it's a challenge.
Right.
One of the great things about podcasts is they're very subjective. So if someone's listening, they may like, yeah, Simon, what you're talking about, you and Craig, you're talking about mentorship. That's it. Got it. I'm on board. Give me more of that.
Right.
Or they may, what, these guys clearly have no idea what they're talking about. I think I'm going to go not listen to this anymore and move on to the next thing. So there's advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I know when I was trying to learn my leadership skills, not that because I was not mentored very much in my development, I was going out and reading these great leadership books that were coming out, in the 80s and the 90s. And Lou has a lot of great books on leadership from the 40s and the 50s that he likes to refer to all the time. But that was those are kind of classics of leadership training. And now, as you say, I grabbed the first video when I want to try and figure out how to fix something in my house, right? Or how to change windshield wiper blades. But we're saying that same kind of mentality with this next generation of leaders is Googling, how do I lead? And it's whatever YouTube video or podcast pops up and they're off to the races.
Yeah, if you show up on page 2 or 3, if you're not on page 1, forget it. So, but see, Simon, you made me all of a sudden understand and realize the burden that's on Craig and I and you with your podcast, that we're either screwing up that generation of leaders or we're really helping them. So we need to take that into consideration, that they may be taking us really seriously, and we got to make sure we hit a home run every single time.
Yeah, no pressure at all. It's definitely a big challenge for sure. And every time an episode is about to drop on my podcast, I feel the anxiety of like, okay, are people going to respond to this? Am I just going to start getting a litany of emails and notes saying, what what the hell were you thinking? So I always try and put some type of research into what I'm talking about. It doesn't always work out that way.
Right.
But it's, you're right. There's some onus on us. And I think we put it on ourselves because we can only, either people are going to resonate with what we're talking about or they're not. And there's generally not too much of a middle ground. That's been my experience anyways.
No, you're absolutely right. Particularly in this age of misinformation, you just don't want to be putting stuff out there that only you believe to be true, and you tend to collect a large gathering of individuals that are following you, and you're really not providing them the best information possible. So that's why when you say research, like Craig and I always, and we've done it from day one, we prepare, we do research, we share articles with each other, we talk to other people, so that when we come on, we have formed our opinions, but our opinions aren't just off the top of our head or from my 1930 and 40 management books, as Craig says, but a little bit more modern, maybe 70s and 80s. But it is important for people who are in, and I'm going to use the term learning and development, because I truly believe that what Craig and I do and what you do is learning and development for individuals that are seeking other avenues of information to help them better themselves. Because as we know with the with the millennials, they definitely are into development, and they want companies to invest in them to develop them, because if not, then that's when they start moving on toward greener pastures.
I know for myself, like today, I just happened to be reading. I really enjoy Harvard Business Review articles. They're just about the right size to read and digest the information. They're full of research and different places to go and stuff. And today, I happened to be reading an article that talked about what is lifelong learning? What does that mean? And how does it? Because we hear it all the time now.
Yeah.
And one of the points that was brought out of that is when an organization is talking about this, creating this new learning platform in their organizations, they're not upskilling. What they're doing is, or rather they are upskilling. So they're just taking the information that currently exists, putting it into a nice little learning bundle, and then sending it out. Well, that's great. And I'm not knocking that. The challenge is with new leaders, they need some of that information that exists right now, but they also need to be able to learn forward, seeing forward how they're going to help with their own evolution, because we're always learning, we're always evolving.
Right.
And that's a big part of that. But one of the failings, I believe, is that if we're just taking the information that's up now, if that learning platform isn't updated, the information isn't updated, they're already behind. So
right.
How do we keep them going forward? That's really, honestly, how I hoped the How Trench Leadership came about, because I wanted to help emerging leaders get information that they could use now versus 10 years from now when they traditionally get it.
Right. And see, something that you said, and Craig and I have harped on this on several of the podcasts that we've done when it comes to learning and development, is for so many organizations and the individuals within the organizations taking the training is a check the box activity. I need communication skills. My people need communication skills. I'm the company. I bring in somebody to teach communication skills. I check the box. I provided that training. And then the employee who has to sit through that, they check the box because my butt was in the seat for 8 hours or 16 hours, however long it was. And I went through the training, but then everything goes back to the way it was. And so with what you are providing your listeners and viewers, and what we're providing our listeners and viewers on Q&A and Breakthrough Leadership, there is that other aspect of learning and development, particularly when it comes to leadership, that I believe, and I believe, Craig, you think it's important also. It's that implementation and that follow through, because let's face it, we've all read self-help books. I've got a ton behind me on my bookshelf, but did I read them from page 1 to page 200? No, I picked and choose what I wanted to read, and I went through it, picked up some good advice. Did I implement it all? Probably not. Probably I implemented 3 to 5% of what I read. So for companies with the ability to provide training and development, to their individuals through podcasts, sharing our podcasts. We say at the end of each one of our podcasts, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with people in your group, in your department, on your team that you believe this will help them. We're providing just one piece of that learning and development. And for emerging leaders, it's that that on-the-job training that we all talked about.
I couldn't agree with you more. The challenge is, a lot of times the emerging leaders, that my experiences have been that they're overwhelmed more often than not. And when we're speaking to that team, I think I had mentioned it earlier, there's this concern like, oh, if I don't have all the answers, well, then I can't be the leader. Well, that's not accurate. And then the other thing we ran into a lot, the conversation that comes up all the time, is understanding the why of things. Then leaders today, I believe, emerging leaders today have a much better ability to explain to their teams why things are happening, because it's just what that generation is used to. They're just able to get the information so quickly, and it takes us back to a point we talked about earlier, where if we don't provide the why to something, well, they'll just go to Google, and the first hit that comes up is going to be the why, whether it is or not. It's a challenge.
Yep.
So Simon, as you think back to your time, we often think of the military as a place where people get a lot of great training on leadership. And at least here in the States, we value those people coming out of the military to come in as leaders in our organizations because they're exposed to leadership at such an early level. What are some of the best practices you saw in your time that you think would translate well into this next generation of leaders and how we bring those people up? Are there some lessons from that you think are worth pulling forward?
Oh, most definitely. I think so. In the Canadian military, it's very simple. I was a senior non-commissioned member, so I was not a commissioned officer. So I retired as a master warrant officer. And in my career path, our first real true leadership position, a junior leadership position, is a rank called Master Corporal or Master Sailor. And generally, the idea is that you're in charge of a group of 3 to 10 people. And one of the strengths of the Canadian military's professional military education and leadership training program, that was a mouthful, is that every time you're promoted, you're trained how to be ready for that position plus the next rank level to a certain extent. And one of the strengths of the Canadian program is that they will simulate a certain amount of stress, and then you'll just role play a little bit to test your ability under simulated stressful conditions to see how you'll do. And then the idea is that you'll say, oh, okay, right on, I'll learn this, I'll pack that, I'll adjust and whatnot. The great thing is you don't even really, you don't need to pass whatever the tasking is. The importance of the lesson and the tasking is to understand how you'll react and what you need to see in those types of things. And I think that's the type of thing that would be very, very helpful for companies and organizations going forward. So if someone has been identified, if there was some type of program to say, hey, we think this person would be a good leader, or they think that they would be a good leader, they could maybe get into one of these types of programs and see and get an idea of what they're going to act like. Because really, you don't really know how you're going to react under a stressful situation until you're in a stressful situation.
Yeah. So the Kobayashi Maru, it's a whole Star Trek thing.
That's exactly it. It's exactly it.
Okay, I'll let you two guys nerd out on Star Trek while I take a sip of my sparkling water.
but it's exactly that idea of I don't think in corporate leadership training we do that much of. And Lou, you've done a lot of it, and you've probably seen more of it even than I have. But how much of that role play are we putting in, and that idea of it's not just for you to be ready to lead at this level, but at the next level. And that idea is such a powerful one to say, no, we're going to put you into test situations so you can at least start to feel that stress.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, going to the Canadian military, what the program that they're using is called succession planning, by getting you prepared not only for your position that you're going into, but the next position, so that they can start testing you. And I've always told managers and executives that I've coached is that you don't need to bring in a formal training program to create the stress that you're talking about, because most formal training programs can't create that simulated stress. What they need to do is they need to pick assignments, duties, and put someone that's never been in charge in that position, then they will experience real live stress. But as the manager or the leader putting that person in that position, you need to be there to catch them when they fall. So that this way you can pick them up, brush them off, and tell them what they did wrong. Just like a football coach running up and down the sideline. You come off there after a play, coach grabs you and says, "Hey, this is what you did wrong." You sit out the play, and then you run in for the next play. And you're absolutely right, Simon. We need more of putting our emerging leaders under that real life stress that a normal learning and development program in a classroom online is not going to do. And let's face it, most of us learn through task training, not necessarily book training. There was a point when we were in school, we were book learners. Now we are task learners. And so don't tell me how to do it, show me how to do it, and put me in that position and let me try it. That, in my opinion, has always been the best leadership test, if we can call it that, for those emerging leaders.
Well, I agree. And the other great thing about in these taskings is people will be able to see, oh, hey, that they can actually do something. Like, oh, I can lead people.
Absolutely.
Or I'm really good at this. Or, okay, when I get super nervous, I talk faster than the road runner runs. Sometimes these people, you don't understand. I'm the same way. When I get going, you may as well just go have a coffee. I'll be back in a minute. So it validates, and it also really opens a person's eyes. It's like you said, anyone can be, or not anyone, being book smart is different than being task smart.
Right.
And understanding how to do those two different things are very different.
Yeah. Growing up in New Jersey, we called that street smarts.
Jeez. So Simon, we've talked a lot lately about the Great Resignation, this idea that people are leaving their jobs. Lou alluded to it a little while ago. As we think about these emerging leaders and all these leaving jobs, job openings, all that moving around, what are some opportunities? How should emerging leaders look at these opportunities that might be created through the Great Resignation? And maybe you've even had some interviews about that, but what opportunities would they have with all this going on?
I think the really amazing thing about that is there are so many opportunities that maybe pre-COVID wouldn't have presented themselves. People were we were just kind of doing our jobs and doing our stuff and going through the motions and everything. But this massive upheaval has shown people, okay, I can work from home, and then I can go do a side hustle. And these side hustles are the things that are showing people that, okay, maybe I'm really good at this and I can go do something else, or I can do this or whatnot. The danger of that is, and what I've had this in a few interviews, is people will jump and not having really looked at the whole picture. And sometimes you can't, until you're in the moment. It's impossible to have looked at everything it's very difficult. I don't like the word impossible. It's very difficult to have looked at everything from 360 degrees. But once you've made that jump and you've moved on, well, someone has already gone to fill that position. So it's a danger in that if people are looking to do positions and roles that are more fulfilling to themselves, that's great. But at the same token, how are you going to be able to move forward with that? It's without having taken the time to really look at things, it's dangerous, really. I think I kind of danced around that a bit.
No, you didn't dance around, but you talked about, with COVID and people realizing that, hey, I can do this, or this is what I need to do. What have you found from the folks that you've worked with? What are the primary leadership development areas that you have found leaders need more of, or there's not enough of? So if I had a group of emerging leaders in my company, are there specific areas that you found, Simon, that these are some specific curriculum that these folks need to get used to?
So it's a great question. The first thing I would say is that emerging leaders, it's important to understand that they're not infallible, and that's okay. Quite often we heard, when I was speaking to other emerging leaders, it's like, well, I feel this need to be perfect. And the question I always pose is, okay, well, who told you needed to be perfect? And then you kind of get this dumbfounded look for a couple of seconds, like, oh yeah. So you don't need to place all this pressure on yourself. And I think that's something that has to be reminded to people. But it's one thing to say it. It's another thing that when you're a senior leader or you're the boss of an emerging leader or whatnot, and they make that mistake, to remind them that that's okay. Right? There has to be that symbiotic relationship to really back up saying, well, we're not, if you make a mistake, you're not going to be fired. We're going to learn. Now, I will say negligence is different than making a mistake. If someone is willfully negligent, they just did something wrong, that's different. That's completely different. I'm talking about an honest, genuine mistake. And I know myself, I've made all kinds of errors. And coincidentally, in my episode this week, and I'm not trying to tie it in, it just works out well. My guest and I, we talked about, what our leadership philosophies are, where we got that from, and how we tied that in with the examples we've seen of good and bad leadership throughout our lives. And then at the end of it, each of us told a good story of our own personal leadership and one of our massive epic leadership fails and how we learned from that, because we need to see these things. And as we're evolving the senior leadership, it's very, very important to talk to the emerging leaders to help them understand how that evolution happens. That's probably a major gap there, because people, I get it, companies are busy, especially if it's a profit-driven organization. Taking the time to develop is going to take time, and things that take time cost money. Right. So there's a balance there.
Yeah. And when you're working on a quarterly system of looking at income and revenue and everything, if it's not working after one quarter, let's switch gears and let's see if it takes, we can do something else. And so there isn't that consistency. And it's funny because when I first got in the business, their companies used to have large learning and development departments where they would have people of different disciplines, as opposed to two people who teach 90 different subjects each. And they're not an expert in any one. They just know how to deliver material out of a book and through a PowerPoint. Or when I was getting into it wasn't PowerPoint. It was that, what was the where you put the slide on top of the overhead projector. That's what I see. It's been so long, I even forgot the name of it. But yes, the overhead projector with the slides and everything. And that's a lot of what learning and development folks used to do, is they just learned a subject and were able to present it, but not really get into it. And then when we went through, the Great Recession, and we went through, 9/11, and budgets sort of hit the skids, and then the financial crisis, those were some of the first areas that actual companies went through and just obliterated. And there was one person, or it was just totally shift to HR. And now I think companies, in my experience, I'm finding that companies are going back to, what, we need to develop our people, and we need to have a development staff. I mean, we have resources we can get from outside vendors like you, Craig, and myself, but at the same time, that in-house, the follow-up, to make sure the accountability that people are doing what we spent money for them to go through. I think companies are experiencing that change, that cyclical change now, where development is becoming, again, a department within a company.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Terrific.
Well, it's time for key takeaways, Lou.
Key takeaways. My key takeaway in this whole thing is with an emerging generation of leaders coming up, primarily now we're talking about the millennials. We saw the handwriting on the wall. The characteristics of that generation were in front of us. We knew that they wanted further development, and we had to wait. Most companies waited until COVID came and slapped them in the face and said, hey, don't know if you know, but these people really want you to invest in their personal development, to become a leader within the organization, to take ownership, to feel that they're part of it. And that's going to help you maintain that employee for the longer haul. That's my key takeaway of our conversation.
Well, I have two key takeaways. One,
okay, you're
huge business opportunity. No, there's a big business opportunity. What we need to do is pile our money to put a lot of really bad leadership information out there on the very first video. And then we can sweep in after the fact as coaches and consultants and make bank. So don't anybody steal that great idea. Two, Kobayashi Maru, the idea of really giving that experiential learning for our leaders so they can feel what it's like when the heat is on, I think is a really valuable aspect. Simon, how about you? What are your key takeaways today?
I'd say my key takeaway is understanding that emerging leaders developing them is going to take time. And that's just, there's no way around that. A quick, 1 day lesson or even a 1 week course is great. The learning has been presented, but it's going to take time for the learner to absorb it and learn how to even utilize it and
Right.
take it out and go from there. It's going to take time. So just remember that.
Great. And Simon, we've talked a bit about it, your podcast, Trench Leadership Podcast. How can people find the podcast and how can they best find you?
Well, thank you very much for that. So if you really want to reach out to me directly, you're welcome to contact me at simonk@trenchleadership.com. The podcast itself is called Trench Leadership, a podcast from the front. It's on all of the popular podcast feeds. And one of the great things about this show is that it is meant for emerging leaders. And the idea is to provide inspiration, advice, and practical tools at the end of every episode to help you walk away and have some stuff in your leadership toolbox. And I hope that's what's happening.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
Very good. Lou?
No, I was just saying, fantastic. No, it's always good to get on with a fellow podcaster. One, what we go through, it's not you just turn a camera on and you start talking. We do take this seriously, and I hope that people truly understand that there are a lot of podcasts, as you said earlier, Simon, in this small podcast world. Even though 2 million doesn't sound like a small number, when you consider globally, 2 million is a very small number. That there are podcasters that truly take their business seriously like we do. And we want to provide that learning and development for folks who are what you referred to as a lifetime learner. And so I'm glad that we could fill that niche. So Simon, it has been great seeing you and having you on our podcast. I know this isn't going to come out today, but today is Canadian Thanksgiving. So let me wish you a happy Thanksgiving, even though this probably won't come out till a month, which will probably be closer to US Thanksgiving at that point. So it may be timely that I'm saying happy Thanksgiving. I don't know.
Still valid. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us, Simon. We enjoyed having you here today.
Thanks so much, guys. This was a lot of fun, and thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate that a lot.
Well, Craig, that was a great interview for our first international interview. Guys, Simon definitely provided some good information, particularly when talking about leadership and, going back to our theme of the last 3 podcasts that we've done when it has to do with the Great Resignation. Leaders are looking, or I shouldn't say leaders, people are looking to expand into leadership roles. And there are lots of different opportunities for them to find, as we talked about in the podcast. They can go to podcasts, they can read books if the company's not providing. But I think with this next group of emerging leaders, they are going to do a good job seeking out what they believe they need to do to improve and to become a leader. What do you think of that?
No, I think they do. It's, we do this for a reason. We do Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership for a reason. We want to help people find the ways to improve their leadership skills, to make better decisions, to be better leaders. So it only makes sense. It's where things are going.
Very good. So if you like this episode of Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership and our interview with Simon Kardynal, please like, share, subscribe. We're available every Thursday on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. In addition to that, we're also available on all of your major podcast platforms. So please give us a rating, leave us a note, give us a comment. This way, people will find out about Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership. So in the meantime, until next week, keep your hands washed, keep your distance. I'm Lou Quinto.
And I'm Craig Anderson.